Hey, Brandon here, and welcome to today's episode. We're featuring John Thurmond and Wendy Dailey. They are the hosts of the HR Social Hour Half-Hour podcast, and this is the first ever crossover that we've ever done between two podcast shows in the HR industry. So John and Wendy come on our podcast, and then I hop over to their podcast. Their episode will be out in a couple weeks, so definitely go check that out. But in today's episode, I really asked them all about their background as HR professionals, how they've built up this amazing community on Twitter and in this podcast. And they attend a ton of conferences and network and speak and do so many amazing things. So we kind of go into the background of what they do. But also we talk a lot about trends that they're seeing in the HR industry and in workplaces. So I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Go over to Apple Podcasts. If that's how you listen, give us a 5-star review, give us a written review. That would be very helpful. And let's get going. Okay, I've got John Thurmond and Wendy Dailey with me. Thank you guys for coming on the podcast. How you doing?
Doing well.
Doing
Thanks
great.
For having us.
Doing great.
Well, this is fun. So, Wendy, you're in South Dakota,
Yep.
and John, you're in Virginia. So we're all across the nation in terms of time zones right now. For me, it's 4:30 in the afternoon on a Friday. I'm curious because you both have full-time jobs as HR practitioners. You also host a podcast together, which is sort of a crossover show. You're the host of the HR Social Hour Half-Hour podcast, and you run tons of Twitter chats monthly. How did you guys meet? How did you get into this whole thing? Give me the background.
Well, we met on Twitter, quite honestly, at a Twitter chat hosted by SHRM called Next Chat, and kind of bonded over the fact I lived in Virginia, in Richmond, for a number of years. And so we kind of connected that way, and then met each other in real life for the first time at SHRM that was held in DC, the national conference, 2016, John?
2016.
Yep. Saw John from out in the expo floor. And because I knew who he was, I recognized him from his avatar, which, hey, people use a real avatar.
Yeah.
And said, hey, it's John. And so we chatted a little bit. Next morning, I get on the elevator, and who's there but John? So we got to walk to the conference together a couple days in a row and really just connected that way.
What's fascinating to me is I'm on Twitter. Admittedly, I'm more of an observer than a contributor. But what you guys have really built with this HR community on Twitter is so fascinating. And I think, I've noticed it with John a lot, where he's traveling to a conference and he's posting pictures of people he's meeting where you probably met on Twitter. Like, it's just fascinating. How did you build like this community on Twitter where you guys actually get to know each other, even though you're spread all across the country?
It's a great question. And, interestingly enough, I was a lurker for a long time and had done Twitter, especially for fun stuff. Among other things, I also co-host a podcast about 80s properties and toys and comic books and what have you. And so I've been on Twitter for a long time doing that. When I got laid off several years ago from my last employer, I got on Twitter and started lurking around to just keep up and learn more about what was going on in the HR community. What I found, though, is when I started contributing and tweeting people, or, hey, I read something that somebody wrote and I replied, or that's really interesting, or somebody asked a question and I would contribute an answer, you start building rapport. And then I found that the more we got engaged, I learned that, a lot of people, we have similar interests outside. So I'm really into the band Rush. And all of a sudden I found out, hey, there are practitioners in the US, the UK, all over the globe that are into Rush. So we start talking about Rush, and you build those relationships to where, then you meet. Or, for example, Wendy and I were just at a conference in New York City, ran into or had dinner with someone we've known via Twitter for years. I hadn't seen him in 3 years, but we talk every week about Rush. And it's that kind of, it's building that community. And so when we launched the Twitter chat initially, it was because we didn't go to SHRM National in New Orleans. And we were bonding over the fact that we weren't there.
Fascinating.
And so, it was people, literally 9 countries were represented in that hour-long chat about, oh, wow, we're not, what are we missing? And then we find out the next day, hey guys, you were on the social media boards at National and you're not even here. So I think it's, that I think part of that is that, I know Wendy and I are both huge Twitter fans. I think there's a lot of great thought leaders there. I've learned so much from so many people. It has really expanded my perspective on what we do as practitioners and as a person. And I'm really glad that I started contributing and saying something.
So since you guys have built such a huge following on Twitter and a great community, there's so many HR people out there, and even people that wouldn't classify themselves as an HR person, but could get value from joining this community. How do you encourage people who aren't really power users on Twitter to get involved? Because there's a lot of great ideas that are probably not being unleashed on your community.
I think that's a huge challenge, because there's still a lot of HR pros out there that are still kind of scared of social media.
Mm-hmm.
They're scared of being found, privacy and all of that, which there's an element of unless you go completely off the grid, somebody's going to find you. So if you are out as a professional, I've gotten a few people on by sitting down with them and walking them through, here's how you get on Twitter. Inviting them specifically to a chat, and so they can see the interaction, they can see the value in it. And I've gotten a couple of people really active. I invited them to be part of the social media team for the South Dakota SHRM conference, and they did a great job. I was only there for a short time, and they were sharing information. They had the hashtag going. So
I love it.
You need to just sit down and show them what the value is.
One of the things that really scares me about Twitter in particular, and this is not necessarily true about the HR stuff, but it's so polarizing with ideas, and people attack each other all the time. And I'm curious if, for HR people who are kind of scared, or even, somebody like me who I don't like putting a lot of my opinions out there out of just pure fear that I'm going to be judged or attacked. So I'm curious if you've ever had anybody like that in the community where thought it was a good idea, put their opinion out there, and then people start going after each other? Or is it really a community where people support each other in their ideas and say, that's a great idea, what about this too? Those sort of productive dialogues.
I think it all comes from the approach that you have. And I think if you go in assuming that people are coming from a place of well-meaning and not the polarizing stuff, to your point, I mean, there is the mute button always. There's the block button.
True.
I haven't ever seen it much in the HR community that's there. And I think we have civil discourse because we all want to get better.
Yeah.
I think we want to get better as practitioners. We want to be better people. And I think you can use, it's not just Twitter. You could certainly do it with Facebook. You can do it with LinkedIn. You asked about the people that are uncertain. I do a lot of presentations on social, particularly when it comes to recruiting. And I'm amazed at the number of people that still come up to me that don't really have a frame of reference at all. And, I guess I'm just working from the assumption that people would have something, a Facebook to connect with family or what have you. And I still get so many questions about basic blocking and tackling type things when it comes to social, which is surprising. I'm glad it's there because it gives me an audience, and I love talking about that stuff, and like Wendy, getting people engaged to come check out a chat, to put something out there. And I think, again, we've developed a community that is very welcoming, and we want everybody to be part. We want people to not only be welcome, but to contribute, because again, you might have a perspective or an idea that I've never thought of, that I don't understand, that I need to know to get better, again, as a practitioner, as a person. And I think it's all in assuming from the beginning that people are coming from the right perspective and wanting to do well and not be a jerk, right? Because we know there are plenty of jerks out there. And again, there's that beautiful button you just hit that you don't want to hear from them anymore. But I feel like for the most part, the community that we are part of and that we've helped develop tends to be civil and wants to have conversations that are productive and not destructive.
Unless you're going to talk about movies.
Well, good point.
Talk about some of those chats that you said you've helped develop. I think you started a few of the chats, maybe all of them, that are related to the HR world. Talk about some of the chats that people should get into, and what can they expect out of some of those, and what, how can people jump in and start contributing?
Well, a couple years ago, I put together a list of them, and bless your heart for saying that we started them all, but we didn't. We started
Bummer.
one.
And that was the HR social chat that you started?
HR Social Hour is the one that we started once a month, Sundays at 7 p.m. Eastern time. We both participated Next Chat, which is Wednesday afternoons at 3 p.m. Eastern time. Monday evenings, there's a Job Hunt Chat, it's called, and helps people who are not just in HR, but also any people who are just looking for a job and giving them hints and kind of see both sides of it. I'll share the link where I have the list. I haven't looked at it in a while, so I don't know how current it is, but there's a plethora of chats out there, and it's really finding the one that works for the time that you have available and the conversations that you want to have. The thing I like about the three that I mentioned is, and most of them that I've participated in, you can come and go, and people might say, hey, haven't seen you in a while, but there's no, there's nothing about, well, who are you? Why are you here? It's people are very welcoming on those chats, because you're in a chat for a reason. You want to have that discussion.
And then you guys started the HR Social Hour podcast. How did that come about? You two as co-hosts, and what did you really hope to accomplish with that podcast?
We had been doing the Social Hour chat for several months, and like I said earlier, I've co-hosted another podcast for quite a long time. I called Wendy one day. I do a lot of traveling in my day job, and Wendy happened to be at another SHRM event. I called her while I was driving halfway across the country, and I told her, I said, look, I want to do a podcast that is focused on our business, that is focused on HR and the people. I just can't figure out what our perspective is going to be, or my perspective is going to be, but I'd really like to do with somebody. I'd like to have a co-host, and I'd like you to do it. And Wendy thankfully said yes. And we started talking about, ideas about what we would do. And really where we landed was the whole idea, we're looking at building community. We liken it to having a cup of coffee with somebody and spending 30 minutes or so with them to get to know a little bit about them. And then we have a second half of the show called The Question Connection, where we ask everyone the same types of questions. So if I meet you down the road and I know your favorite movie is Star Wars, hey, Brandon, I like Star Wars too. Or your favorite book is The Jungle Book. Oh, I love The Jungle Book. Or have you read this? Whatever it may be. But, we really talk about, it's all about connecting and giving back to your community, be it the HR community or your community at large, and building your network. And that's what we found was really resonated not only with us, but thankfully with our audience. They really wanted to find that. And so it's amazing. It's been amazing. I know Wendy and I both talk about the fact in the last, we launched in February of 2018, and, now fast forward, not even quite a year later, it's gone so much bigger than we ever dreamed. 73 countries, conferences that we attend now as either social media team or speaking, and all these things came about, and recording podcasts with people that we would have never dreamed that we would.
So true.
So it's just been a really amazing ride. And it just started with, I really wanted to do something. And I knew Wendy, I trusted Wendy. I felt like we would bounce well off each other because we had spent time together. We've talked about these things, and we were doing the chat together. And I thought, well, as long as she's willing to sit there and let me hit play, let's see what happens.
It was fascinating to me, is I think you just said a few seconds ago that you kind of liken the podcast to having a cup of coffee with an HR person. But I remember listening to, I think it was a few episodes ago, you had an employment law attorney. I cannot remember his name, but he stated that he was having coffee in his cup, and you said that you'd never had anybody answer it with coffee. Is that really true? Like, what do people usually drink?
Well, when they listen to the crossover, hint, right. The first question we always ask is, what's in your glass? Because that's also the first question that we ask on the chat. each month.
Yep.
We built the chat to be an entry point. Hey, we want everybody to come in. And if you're not comfortable with Twitter or chats, kind of learn, this is an easy one and no right or wrong. You could drink whatever you want, but we always start the show. And I believe it or not, especially we record in the evenings, and I don't know about you, but I don't drink coffee at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night.
No, not a chance.
So I think that was part of it. We've had every kind of answer now that I think within reason.
I think my favorite one, our latest guest, our last guest, Victorio, he took a different direction with it. And I liked where he went. He obviously hadn't listened to the podcast before, which is perfectly fine. But he kind of talked more about what he was doing, what was keeping him busy. And so he just took that question in a different way. And we're like, okay, that's cool. So we really have had a lot of different liquids. And then we had someone also ask, so are you asking me literally what's in my cup? Can I have wine? Like, well, we can't see you, so drink what you want,
I love that the question that you start with, and even you said on the live chat you'd start with a basic question, because it breaks down barriers. And I think that's what good HR people do. They bring people together, they're inclusive, things like that, and I think it just makes people comfortable. Is that what you've kind of seen through doing all of this?
Definitely.
Absolutely. And again, that's been the goal. I mean, I will say it, and I'll say it when crossover hint happens. You were one of the shows that I listened to as I started trying to figure out what to do. And I think there are so many great HR podcasts where this medium just continues to grow. I know when we launched, all of a sudden it seemed like 2 or 3 other people, great people, big names in our business, all of a sudden everybody's got a podcast. Like, oh no, but there's a space for everybody.
Yep.
And what you're doing is so different from what we do.
So different. Yep.
And that's a good thing, because we complement each other. And, there was, our last crossover show was with Hostile Work Environment. Rest in peace to that podcast.
I know,
one of my
they're
favorite
such a great podcast.
Yeah.
Shout out to them.
Yeah. So, it's that kind, but again, that's a community build. And let's use that example. So here are 2 employment attorneys on your side of the country who we got to know. Turned out they're both, again, big Rush fans. What happens last summer? I meet them in Pittsburgh at a conference.
Yep. No
I
way.
was driving through for work, and I said, hey guys, I'm driving through, and we sat down, we broke bread, we hung out for an hour, we talked about, and then we recorded a show for 20 minutes in the hall at ASHRA's national conference. Totally, just that's the beauty of this. I mean, we consider ourselves really fortunate to get to know people literally everywhere, people doing things like getting to know you and doing this. And it's all about being willing to put yourself out there.
I love that. So you guys, we talked about, you've built a great online presence, but what I think I love following you two online, because it seems like you're always traveling to conferences and meeting cool people and having fun. And it's really fun to see that. And I'm curious, like, what presents the opportunity? How do you get to go to these conferences all the time? Do you go to speak? Do you go to attend? Is there dual purpose? Like, give me some sense for why either, and maybe it's a different reason for each of you, but I'm curious, why do you attend so many, and which ones do you love?
I think the majority of the larger conferences, at least that we go to, are to be like that media, do social media for them, help promote, we have, podcasts or blogs that we put together either before or after the conference to continue to share that content and learn. So, it's kind of you kind of feel guilty, but you don't, especially the last one with Namely, their speakers were just phenomenal. Felt like I learned a lot from it. And being able to bring that back and share that with the people that I do work with. But there are other smaller venues that we both speak at. My favorite venue to speak at is Disrupt HR. That short 5-minute presentation is just fun.
Oh, yeah.
And I get to tell people, if you get a bad speaker, they're done in 5 minutes. So you can put up with anyone for 5 minutes.
Yeah. What do you two see as like really the main benefit to attending some of these conferences? Is it to network with people? Is it the content to kind of build your personal brand and support what you're doing? What is it?
I think it's a mix of things. I think a big part of it, using our last conference that we just attended in New York with Namely, part of it was connecting with people that we've been talking to for a long time. via social, and you really feel like you know people, and you meet them, you give them a hug or handshake or whatever people are comfortable with, but you make these connections, you talk more, but again, you have some speakers that you haven't seen before, you're listening, and you meet new people that again are bringing different perspectives, and yes, it doesn't hurt our brands, and it doesn't hurt the social hour for us to be at a conference, and we have pins that we wear on our badges, and oh, what's that pin? Oh, I do a podcast. Oh, what's it about? And we tell them, and all of a sudden you pick up a listener or two. And last year was at SHRM National in a big conference room, and the speaker came over to say hello to me, and all of a sudden the people behind me are like, how do you know him? Well, I know him through Twitter, this, that, and the other, but we know each other, on a personal level. And oh, by the way, he's been on my podcast. All of a sudden we pick up 2 more subscribers.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of all of it. And I think that's the fun part of conferences is, we do get a chance to learn new things. Some of it is good repetition or hearing it from maybe a different perspective, the ideas being the same, but just a different voice resonates in a different way. And again, making those connections and getting to hang out with people after the conference and talk about what you learned and talk about your real jobs or talk about your families and build those rapports so that 2 or 3 months from now, I got an issue with something. I can call Wendy, or I can call a list of people according to what I need. Do I need help with recruiting? Do I need help with an HR tech question? Whatever it may be, you have this group of connections and people and friends that you've built that you can call and get that professional guidance that you need.
That's probably so true. Like you're each so good at something probably unique, and you built this network of people you can probably call on anytime for some help. It's almost like having like a bunch of HR consultants in your back pocket or something, just based on the network that you've built. That's amazing.
It's a great way of putting it.
Yeah,
it's a great way of putting it.
So you guys are attending all these conferences like all the time. You go for learning, as you'd mentioned, John. Wendy, I'm curious, what are some common trends that you're seeing just in terms of topics and what people are thinking about right now, whether it's something they're worried about in their workplace or something that is just like, oh, we've got to do this, we've got to implement this, it's trendy, it's going to transform our workplace. What are you seeing out there?
There's a lot of talk around AI, the artificial intelligence, and what it can do for HR. And a lot of people are worried about it, but there's also a lot of folks out there looking to embrace it. How can we make our lives better with this? It's a machine. So, we have to make sure we're careful with what we're doing. And the 2 topics that I pay attention to right now is the AI and then also diversity and inclusion. And that's one of the worries with, AI, because there's bias everywhere. So are we putting our own biases into the AI? Is that going to hurt the diversity piece of it? And what are ways that how can we be inclusive while we're using some of this software to bring out more and better people, not continuing to look in the same places all the time to keep getting the same thing. How can we get more and better?
That's so fascinating. You're talking about like those 2 things, AI and then diversity, inclusion, and bias. I had interviewed a few episodes ago, we were talking about bias, and we were talking about like the applicant tracking system. Yeah. It's not really machine learning or anything, but it is a technology where you could literally filter out people, and you can project your biases through a technology.
Yeah.
And I never really thought of it that way, but the way she was making it sound was like, yeah, you could just set up all these filters, and if you want to have somebody who went to USC just like you went to USC, then there you go. You're top of the pile.
Yeah, and it's really, it's amazing to just because you don't think you're doing it, but you are. And it's more helping people to be aware of what your biases are. I think there's too many HR folks who they're probably not listening to this podcast, so they won't be offended, but they're out there. Oh, we're HR, we're unbiased. Of course, we don't discriminate based on age. I'm like, well, did you ask your hiring manager why they turned that person down? No. Well, how do you know they said they have a legitimate reason as opposed to, they're too old? You don't, unless we ask those questions.
Yeah. John, what are you seeing out there in terms of the conferences? Any different than what Wendy's seeing out there from a trend standpoint?
I think those are 2 really big topics. I think another one that we're seeing is the whole idea about whole self, bringing whole self to work, being a person, I think is really, it seems like people, are talking more about that. Look, we've got a lot of really poorly equipped leaders out there. I think we can all agree on that. Again, there's a reason there are a number of management podcasts. There's always that need. There's always new leadership books. They haven't cracked that nut. I think, though, unfortunately, it seems like we pick people based on how well they produce sometimes, and they put them in a leadership role. They don't know what they're getting into. They don't know. They're not, and we don't give them the tools necessarily to do that. So I feel like that kind of beating that drum along with the whole idea of this whole person, and that the so many things have changed, in the many years I've been doing this, and for Wendy as well, between gig economy and flex scheduling and all these things. We don't have work-life balance
No.
it's all kind of a blur. And so again, I think just like we do it on social and how we talk about things or share things that are a little more personal, probably, a little more open sometimes at work. I know when I was a supervisor, I would never dream of connecting with my employees on Facebook. I don't do it now with my coworkers.
Really?
That's just a personal, for me, that's a personal thing. You can follow me on Twitter. I connect on LinkedIn, but Facebook's my thing.
It's good that you have the boundaries. That's
but that again, that is a decision I made. I find it fascinating. I hear a lot about, bringing the whole self and what does that really mean? And, and being cognizant of who you are and what you're about. And are you showing that to other people? So I think those are, like Wendy said, with D&I and AI, those are certainly really big, hairy eyeballs out there right now. But I feel like I see a lot of that with the leadership piece, and again, recognizing that leaders just need to be reskilled, better skilled.
Agreed.
Given opportunities to become effective leaders.
Funny, because I think a lot of leaders, they became leaders because, at least this is my theory, that they were really good at their job as a practitioner or whatever they were doing, building widgets or something. And then they just, like, oh, you're really good at your job, so you want to get a pay raise. Well, you're going to manage some people now too. And they're not really people leaders. And so it's funny. I just finished listening to, I don't know if you listen to Adam Grant's podcast. Can't remember the title of it, but he had this episode on no assholes at work. And because a lot of leaders, that's how they manage. They're overpowering. They're ego driven. They're assholes. And I think what people want nowadays is an empathetic leader, somebody who can connect with them and understand where the employee's coming from. And I think leaders need a lot of work. And so I imagine that you're probably hearing that kind of stuff a lot.
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting things I heard lately is you have to know the tech, but you have to also have this whole idea of relational EQ. Yeah. That's a newer concept for me. And it really resonated with me personally when I heard that, and trying to take both those things and put them together to be effective, not just as an HR practitioner, but I think as a leader as well. And how do you marry those two things and really understand that? Because I think as much as tech has improved, I mean, look, when I started in HR as a recruiter, it literally was all paper. It was all paper. We didn't have computers. And I think about how far we've come. I recruited on MySpace, for crying out loud. Yes, I'm that old.
No, hey, MySpace. I will admit this. I met my wife on MySpace.
Nice.
Hey, there you go.
We were going to the same college, but that was like the only network where you could digitally connect. Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, you think about now with the fact that a bot can go out and screen resumes for me and give me just 2 or 3 and say, based on what you told me to look for, here you go, out of the hundreds of thousands you may see. So that has all changed. However, we keep going back to this people piece.
Yeah.
And I think that's the great thing for HR practitioners and to remember, is that at the end of the day, it still boils down to people, regardless of what industry you're in and how much tech or how low tech it may be. Wendy's in healthcare. I'm in construction. Those industries are really different in a lot of ways. The people issues are still the same.
They are, absolutely.
People issues in IT are the same, whatever it may be. And I think that we have to always keep that in mind too.
Oh my gosh, I could just continue talking to you about we could keep going down every rabbit hole imaginable. I want to keep moving though, because you guys have limited time. You both said that you speak at some smaller conferences that you go to. When you are speaking, what do you like to share with people? And whether it's in a conference, on the podcast, or even the live chat on Twitter, what particular topics do you like going with?
I talk a lot about personal brand. I talk a lot about social recruiting, team building, military recruiting. That's been something I've done a lot of, and so I like to speak from that position of understanding. I think but that's a big part of it, and then of course it's also an opportunity to pitch the podcast, and get people to think about that. But I mean, I think that's one of the nice things is Wendy and I tend to go in very different directions when it comes to what we talk about, and I think that's one of the fun things about our relationship and how we bounce off of each other is that I think I tend to talk much more about the tactical and maybe I think she's got some great things about the strategic, some of those other things that are out there.
I've done a few talks and on actual just networking and Twitter and how do you use it and how do you make that happen, and trying to get do more talks around diversity, kind of pushing that. I've been learning a lot about that over the last year, and we've got so far to go, but we've learned so much.
I agree.
And so just trying to get more of that information out there. So working on a talk on that, just trying to figure out which direction to go because there's too many.
Wendy, if you're to think about like a trend that's happening in HR, in the profession, or even just in the workplace regarding people, what most excites you about what's happening in terms of a trend, if there is one that you can think of?
That's a really good question. You know, I think we're kind of getting into a nice mix, I think, of not just bring your whole self to work, but understanding who people are and getting to know people. And we're not away from the 9 to 5 yet, or 8 to 5. I don't know who works 9 to 5. I don't know anyone who works just 9 to 5.
Nobody, no.
But we still have that.
Exist.
But getting into, when does the work really need to be done? Do we really need to be sitting at a desk from 8 to 5? And can we do it in different ways? Where I work now, we have the option to work from home 1 day a week. And I actually, the people I recruit for are 3.5 hours away from where my office sits. So being able to have that flexibility, and I think it's great that technology has given us that option to be more flexible with how we are serving the people that we work with and work for. So I think that's exciting, and I hope to see more of that to give people that flexibility to work when and where they need to.
John, you've had a really long career in HR from what I believe that you said earlier. What's changed the most about the way the HR profession is from when you started to now? Anything that either is so different or something that's better or worse? Or I'm curious on your thoughts on the profession in general.
I think the thing that I have been most pleased to see, and Wendy and I always talk to other practitioners about how they got in to the business. And, I use the term fell. I like somebody that says I walked in. I started my career as a public school music teacher and went to a temp agency to be a temp. And they hired me, and I kind of moved up the recruiting ranks that way and got into corporate recruiting, and then was a labor relations union negotiator for a long time. So I've had a really interesting path along the way. I think one of the things that I've been really pleased to see is the shift from just the compliance component of what we do, and that, yes, we have all kinds of laws we live under. However, I think all three of us can agree that HR works in gray all the time.
Yep.
We have a friend that has a blog about working, life in the gray. We work in this gray, and we have to be better business people. We have to understand the widgets that we're making. I worked for a very, very large company at one time in my career, and I was always amazed at my peers that didn't understand what we did and didn't even really seem to. I don't want to say they didn't care. It wasn't a priority for them to understand how the widgets were made. And I don't get that, because if I can't understand how the widget's made, how do I talk to that manager who's got a manning issue or John, I need training about the widget A machine. If I don't understand widget A machine, not that I have to run the machine, but I've got to understand, well, this is why a machine is important. Here's how we develop the training. I think that shift, at least, and I know many of our peers have been thinking as business people for a long time. I think, though, there's been that shift from just compliance to we have to be strategic. We have to understand the business. We have to really deliver the people operations piece of this. And, we see how many people don't have HR in their title anymore. Chief People Officer. I heard that a lot lately.
I love that one.
And again, titles are all well and good. At the end of the day, can you deliver on what you're supposed to be doing? That's my big thing as far as that goes. You can call me whatever you want. I know I've got a job to do, and if I deliver and my management's happy, and from a field perspective, and my corporate management are happy with what I'm doing, then I'm being and I feel like I'm successful. Then it's a win-win-win. But I think that's been the thing I've been most pleased to see is that shift. And, I've just been really fortunate to work for companies where I've gotten to learn how the widgets are made. I got interested in how the widgets were made, and I want to keep building that knowledge base, and that I can go out and talk to not only people in my industry, but in other industries as well, and learn what widgets they're making. And I think that's been a really cool thing.
Well, Wendy, John, this has been like an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. I'm so glad we were able to have you on. I really want you back because there's so much more we could talk about. So you guys have this podcast. You're co-hosts of the HR Social Hour, or half hour podcast. Sorry, butchered that one. So how often is that? And what is your favorite episode? I want each of you to say favorite episode to point people to, and where can people find it?
HR Social Hour half hour podcast comes out every Thursday morning, new episode every week. Wendy also has a podcast that she does with a friend of ours named Ann Tompkinson called Wonder Women, where they focus on women in our industry. Yeah. That comes out typically the second or third Monday of each month. But that regular weekly show is every Thursday. You can find us at hrsocialhourpodcast.podbean.com. We're on all the major platforms, Apple, Android, you name it. Whatever phone or device you use, you can find us out there, hrpodcasters.com even. My personal favorite episode, we sent outlines and thought a little bit about this. Last year, we had an opportunity to be part of the blog squad for SHRM National in Chicago. And we did 2 episodes with our international friends. And I kind of pieced those together because we recorded them over a 2-day period with people from Australia, South Africa,
India.
And what I learned in those conversations is, first of all, there's a lot of Western influence in their favorite movies and music, which I thought was kind of fun.
Would not have thought that.
However, at the end of the day, like we were talking about earlier, all our industries have comparable issues. Yeah. Industry issue, the issues are global. Mm-hmm. Benefits are different. Pay is different. People stuff's still the same. How you recruit is, again, there are different laws and what have you. I think it was so amazing. I know for me, and I know for Wendy too, as we sat at the table with these people that literally live on the other side of the globe, and we're talking about what we do as peers, and we're finding out that, it's not that much different, and that we all deal with comparable things. That to me, that pair of shows, which I think have been our most successful from a download perspective, and have been downloaded all over the globe, because I used to be able to see those numbers. Thanks Podbean for changing that. But that really was, I think those 2. If somebody said, John, what about your show, and what would you say, you and Wendy? I'm most proud of those 2 in terms of content, and the people are all cool, and I can't wait. We get to see most of them again this summer in Vegas at National SHRM. It'll be fun to see them again, and we look forward to doing more of those international shows. We'd like to have somebody on the call like this at some point. We keep looking, but I think I'm really, really proud of those, and I think they're really representative of what we're trying to do with the podcast and building a community.
I love it. Wendy, what about you?
So many to pick from, and I can never quite follow the rules. So I have to say, I'm going to say that our first HR Wonder Woman episode with Margaret Spence, she is just a phenomenal consultant, HR leader out of Florida, and she's kind of the reason we kicked off the spinoff, because I didn't get to see her at SHRM National, and so Ann said, well, let's just do a one-off podcast. So we did one, and then we're like, oh, well, we should talk to all these other people too. And so it was really interesting, because we're focusing on women of color and helping to elevate those voices, and how can we be better? How can all of us be better? And it's interesting to when I listen to some of the raw footage and from some of them, and I just kind of go, oh, wow, I can't believe I actually said that out loud. But it's all about learning and growing. But I think one of my other favorites was our episode with Mary Faulkner, because we had so much fun. She and John geeked out on so many different levels. Towards the end, I got the giggles. Like, there was nothing fangirling out, chatting with Mary. And I've talked with her before, but it was just such a fun episode to talk with her. And like I said, totally geeking out, John and her, on movies and music that I have never heard of before. So I was Googling while we were chatting, but it was just a lot of fun. So those are my two favorite episodes that we've done. In addition to, of course, our international ones. Yeah, John took my absolute top favorites, but.
Well, you guys have been an absolute pleasure. I thank you so much for coming on the Transform Your Workplace podcast. Besides the podcast, where can people find you, follow you, Twitter handle, all that stuff?
I am on Twitter as Windall93, WYNDALL93, or on my blog, mydaileyjourney.com.
You can find me on Twitter at JON_Thurmond, THURMOND, LinkedIn, and as always, HRSocialHourPodcast.podbean.com. And if you're listening to this, make sure you go over and listen to our crossover as we get to ask our questions to Brandon.
John Thurmond, Wendy Dailey, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. A lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Brandon.